Hello, and welcome to the Video Archive series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of the university, particularly from the perspective of their time at SMU. Hello, my name is Carter Murphy, and with us today is Claire Cunningham. Claire has been a member of the SMU community for, well, Claire, I shan't try to say how many years, but more than half a century.
Absolutely.
As an undergraduate, as president of the Staff Association, as a stellar member of the staff for many years, as president of the Alumni Association.
No, not only a vice president.
Only a vice president. Well, that must be the one organization to which you belonged for which you were not president. But her experience at SMU has been extensive, and I'm immensely pleased to be with her this afternoon and have a chance to talk for a while.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here all of this time.
Claire, you were raised in Dallas, I believe.
Yes.
To begin at the beginning.
Well, Dallas, went to North Dallas, and then chose SMU as my university.
May I ask you how you happened to choose SMU?
Interestingly, my father was an Aggie, and you only went to TSCW at that time.
Yes.
But that was right at the end of the war, and TSCW was terribly crowded, and housing wasn't available. And Mother said, wouldn't it be nice if our youngest went to SMU? And that's the best thing that happened.
And so you came.
So I came.
Did you know in what you were going to major at the time you came?
I thought I wanted to do speech because I'd been very lucky in high school and had a wonderful coach and had been successful in forensic activities.
You did debate in high school.
Yes, I did.
And then came into the debate program at SMU. Could one enter that program as a freshman?
You could. I really didn't. I was encouraged to wait out a little bit and get my feet on the ground academically and get going and with the university. But the second year, they came after me again and said, come join us. And so I did. And,
who was the debate coach at that time?
Hal Weiss had just come and taken over the department as the chairman of the department from Edith Renshaw. And Hal was the debate coach and said, you know, come join the team. And so I did.
I always heard great things about Hal Weiss. Are they true?
I think so. I was sharing earlier that after I graduated, I taught speech at Hillcrest High School and did forensics and so forth along with everything else. And I often shared with my students what Hal had told me in one of the particular tournaments we were going into. We were going into the Southern Speech Tournament in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
And this was just before the debate.
Well, actually, it wasn't a debate. It was extemporaneous speech, and I was out there worried. I didn't feel as confident as that as I did to the debates. But worried about it going into the finals, and Hal gave me the words of advice that I've taught you everything I know, go in and add to it and win this thing. And so I used that many, many times telling my students after that when I was coaching at Hillcrest.
Did you win it?
I did.
I thought it was very likely. Now, you were at SMU then as an undergraduate and majored in speech.
Yes. And unfortunately, my degree doesn't exist anymore, but that's okay.
What happened to our debate squad over the years? We eventually gave it up, I believe.
It went on for a number of years, but I don't really think they had anyone that was interested in pursuing it. The other people that they brought in speech, you know, either worked in the drama areas or the radio, and then eventually the TV came after that. And Barney McGrath was radio at first and then did the TV, the initial beginning things. And so, you know, the thrust of it went a different way. And for a long time, I think the debate coach was, he was in the history department. But, you know, it doesn't really necessarily belong there. And who?
Glenn Linden?
No, I can see him to this day.
Glenn did so many things, I will readily accuse him of that.
But SMU pursued a debate squad for probably 10 or more years after that. And then it died out. And in the 80s, when I was back here as a staff member, one day Homer Reynolds, who's now a lawyer.
I remember him well. He was president of the Student Association.
Came to me and he said, "We hear that you did debate back and coached it in high school and was successful. Would you help us do this?" And they had another young man by the name of John McMurphy who was over the law school staff. And he said, "If you and John would help us get a debate team started." So we began to work with him, and I'm trying to think of the faculty professor's name because we needed a faculty, and it was Franklin Bosch.
Frank Bulch.
Bulch.
Yes.
And
in the
he
government
sponsored but didn't really work with us that much, but he had done it earlier. And for about 4 years, we as voluntary staff working after hours
it's enormously time consuming.
coached the debate squad, and they were very successful during that period. John got several things out of them, and because it was part-time for both of us, since we had full-time staff positions, we sort of eventually divided it, and John did most of the debate, and I did most of the forensic things, the radio, the extent, the declamation, the oratories and stuff like that,
All of
the
the
individual
other
events,
Uh-huh.
And we had a very successful squad for about 5 years, but then it just became too much for us to handle.
It's very much too bad we couldn't sustain a debate program, because it's wonderful analytic training, I think. For
we got the provost to even
graduates.
provide some money for it for a while, and which provided the travel for the students. And we took them up to Omaha and University of Nebraska and Cincinnati and a number of places.
Was Hal Weiss still around at that time?
No, he had retired by that time. So
I knew Hal because he went to Thailand one year, and I subsequently went to Thailand,
Okay.
and we had that in common. Claire, let me see. So you were an undergraduate in speech those 4 years, and then after graduation, did you went into teaching? Did
I
you
went
say?
into teaching, and that was fortunate again because my high school debate coach had been made the principal of Hillcrest High School, which was the newest school in the Dallas system at that time. You think of it now as being way in, but it was way out in just a little country school. And he wanted to start a debate program. And when he found out that I'd kept in contact with him, he found out I was going to be doing practice teaching that spring. He requested me, and I was assigned. And when I got there, he introduced me to my supervising teacher, which was the Latin teacher. And she stayed that day, and after that, I only saw her in the hall. It was my class for the rest of the semester.
That was practice teaching.
That was practice teaching at its maximum.
You had taken the education courses then.
Oh yes, I had the 6 hours or whatever it was of the education.
That was a woman's profession in those years.
It was.
To go into teaching.
And it was very rewarding. I loved it, and because we had so much success with the students while I did the practice teaching. We went to state and won 2 of the championships, both women and girls debate. I stood a good chance of being hired the next year, which I did. And I remained there for 6.5 years.
6.5 years.
Until children came along, and at that time DISD said you can't teach any longer.
When were you married? Soon after graduation or before?
1 year after I taught 1 year because Dale had been off in the Army and came back, and so therefore he was 2 years behind by the time he got here. And so he was over in engineering school, and I had to teach at least a year to afford to get him out 1 more year.
Pay the bills. Now, so you taught at Hillcrest for 6 years or so. And why did you leave?
Pregnant with the first child.
Your children were coming.
And we started the family. And that's what my life revolved around for the next few years, basically, was raising 3 girls. They were more or less, say 5, 3, and 1, the 5 years apart was between the
Did
top
they
and the bottom.
ultimately attend SMU, incidentally?
He was a graduate of the School of Engineering.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And he too was headed for A&M, but when he came back from the Army, he came out here and he said, "Oh, I think I'll go see if I can get in." And they accepted him and he stayed. He eventually got his master's here too.
So the children were growing up, and you were involved in the schools.
Very much so. I went through, all the little hats of being the preschool president and the elementary school president and the junior high school president. Involved very much with the kids, and then because of the experience, I went on the city council of PTAs. And that's the sort of governing body of all the PTAs together. And then in 1975 to 76, served as the president of Dallas City Council PTA.
Now,
And then eventually the state level.
what was the time of school integration in Dallas?
We had gotten the first court order back in the 60s, and then the next major court order came in 71 that we must integrate, but no plans were ever really outlined very much. There was some very minor integration, deliberate integration I'm talking about, other than naturally integrated schools. And in 75, Judge, it was William Taylor, but everybody called him Max for some reason. Mac Taylor, you may see, was the federal judge, and he'd had the case for almost 10 years. And the 71 order and the implementation, and this was a very trying time of different groups suing for move ahead and what have you and so forth. And so in 75, he said the schools must be integrated. And a citizens committee headed by Jack Lowe got together and sort of said, let's see if we can work out a plan to where we can do this smoothly without violence and the strikes and the busing and all of that.
Was this a creation of the superintendent?
No.
Or was that committee, did it come out of the old Dallas Citizens Council?
Yes, exactly,
Yes,
exactly. And had some pretty powerful people on it, like Dewey Presley, who was head of the bank, First National Bank, had Dave Fox, who later became the county judge, had Walt Heumann, who later finally got us the Central Expressway done, Charles Cullum.
High-powered group.
Very, and because they wanted some representative, I guess I was selected as both a female and a representative of the PTA, the parents and teachers.
So you served on that committee?
I served on that committee.
Committee was called the?
Well, it was the task force.
The task force for?
Integration.
For integration. And how long did that group work? It finally produced a report for the court.
It produced a report in March. And so I guess we worked, as memory serves it, from about September to March. And initially we worked with consensus only. Jack was very much we're not going to call votes and we don't want confrontation. We're going to try to work through these things. And we eventually hired, I don't know, they'd gotten some money from one of these groups, maybe a Citizens Council or something. I don't even know where they got it. We hired a consultant, Paul Geisel, who's been for many years out at the University of Texas at Arlington, who served as a consultant to us. And both he and the DISD was very cooperative in providing us every kind of demographic we wanted. And we looked at every option we could think of to try to minimize busing and yet maximize integration. And I think the result eventually, unfortunately, Jack had a heart problem along about January, and so Dave Fox took it over as the chairman of the committee. And Dave was a little more perhaps action-oriented and call some votes from time to time, but eventually we voted on a plan. And to this day, I don't think everybody was happy with it all the way, but we felt it was the best we could come up with. And it was to leave our K through 3s intact wherever they were, integrate and use busing at the 4 through 7, and then on up through junior high school and high school. Create magnet schools and recommend pouring a lot of money and resources into improving minority education.
Now, that report was enormously influential, wasn't it?
Very much so, very much so. Judge Taylor adopted it. He decided we were a friend of the court eventually, and so declared us that, and pretty much adopted that report as his report of how the school should be integrated. And then Nolan Estes, at the time the superintendent, picked it up and ran with it. The result was, in the next September, the schools were integrated. There was no strikes, no violence.
The city was terribly much on edge at that time.
Very much on edge, and we were very concerned. And of course, I had tried to mobilize the PTAs. Meanwhile, in the background, all along the way, we were free to come back and report to our groups what was going on. And so we had a monthly meeting, so I would report where we were and things that were being considered.
What people were saying.
And listen to them and go back with those sort of comments and so forth. And there was much anxiety and much concern. But it worked enough to where at least other cities looked at us and invited 4 or 5 of us to come to their cities and tell them about the plans after that.
What cities, for example, Claire, do you remember?
We went to Milwaukee, we went to Los Angeles, we went to Midland, we went to Houston, is what I personally did.
Dallas was the success story then.
At that point.
How did you feel about the implementation of the plan?
Oh, you know.
One is never satisfied.
You're never satisfied.
Yes.
Our schools have changed so much since then. You know, the busing, it's never the best way to do it when you're taking children out of their environment. And our schools that were naturally integrated were far better positioned at the time. And the result was, of course, we lost, as we had predicted, a tremendous amount of white flight. They went to the private schools in droves. And didn't return, because though enrollment is up now, I mean, it was 120,000 students at the time. I think it's 160 or 70,000 now. Our demographics are totally out of skew, because I think at that time we were about maybe 51% white, as I recall. I'm trying to remember the figures, but you know.
And now the Hispanics have the majority, I think.
And Hispanics are far the majority now. I think you only have about 9 or 10% of the whites in the city's schools now.
You, in fact, went on later to the state PTA group?
Yes, I was asked to serve as program chairman for the 2 following years following my presidency of the city council. That was fun, because I helped develop the program of what PTAs ought to be doing in their communities, and went around the state selling it.
Going back a little bit, you've had an involvement with the Chi O's, your old sorority, for many years.
I have.
In what connections?
Well, of course, as an active, and
as an active, as an undergraduate.
That was a pleasure then, and it remains to today. If I just came from a luncheon today where I sat next to my little sister and between a big sister. I mean, these are still today core friends as far as I'm concerned. But I always stayed involved. Within 2 years out of college, I served as the recommendation chairman for a couple of years. And then organized the Night Owls, which was the night group for the the young working people that for the alumni, and then went on to serve as well, of course, in the alumni, but on many committees. But then in the early 60s, I went on to the advisory board for the chapter here at SMU, and then served for the next, I guess it was about 7 years as the personnel director. And, you know, you're dealing with whether it hire the house mother or the complaints or the girls or take someone to the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, who stayed out too late with a certain boy and broke the house codes or whatever.
Now, this is something you're doing as a volunteer.
As a volunteer.
And was that during the period you were still teaching school at?
No. During that time was very much the raising kids and being involved in other things. You know, they're sort of phases that you go through throughout your life.
Were you involved in the Rush program at all?
Yes, very much so, because that was the time that SMU was considering going to the deferred rush. And I'll have to say, I fought that, and the reason being is that we did projections at the time which showed financially how, when you don't get the pledges until January, you've already missed, say, 50 pledges worth of dues. And that then impacts the total projected ability of a sorority to maintain those houses over there on Daniel Street. That's even impacted more now by the love of all of the girls wanting to live in apartments. Now, we require that they live in the house if a space is available to keep them filled. But that can impact you. And the result we predicted at the time, and it has come true, was we had 11 and actually 12 sororities at the time. And the lowest one eventually drops out.
Yes.
And
the Zetas may have been the first to go, were they not? I don't remember.
I don't remember the order. I think the Delta Zetas were the first to go.
One chapter after another was in jeopardy.
And then one after another. Fortunately, most of them now have a good deal of parity to them, so they rush against each other. But I think when a student is on campus for the whole semester and they see XYZ, Chi Omega or anybody else, garnering honors, they want that group, and very often that's all they want. And there are only so many slots, so they are tempted to
So you think a deferred rush impacted the sororities not only because they missed the dues during that first half of a student's freshman year, but because it affected the long-run enrollment in the sororities?
The long-run desire and enrollment for particular groups. They would see who are the leaders on campus. Where I think when you pledge early in the fall, you're choosing more for girl to girl rather than reputation.
Well, you know the faculty's case, of course, that we wanted to get students involved in their academic work before they became swamped in the importance of their social life.
And a believer in academics, I understood all of your arguments very thoroughly. However,
you're a firm believer in
I will
the Greeks.
say that it's my sorority that pushed me immediately as a freshman, and I pledged in the fall at that time, but this was before the deferred rush, pushed me immediately to get into some quality activities. And that probably led to the fact that I had enough things going for me by the time I was a junior, I got an M Award. So, you know, I'll have to credit the sorority. Somebody would say, "Come on, Claire, let's go to so-and-so." Very early, and that happened in the fall of the freshman
So you
year.
think the Greek organizations play an important part
Oh, I
on
do.
the campus?
I absolutely do.
What about the students who are left out? Who either are not selected or who opt out of their...
Most of them seem to find their own activities or their own interest, and And there's some people that a social group is not for them anyway. They don't want to be in it. They'd rather be in the library, and maybe that's good.
We love those students.
Though I'll have to say that my sorority has always played tremendous emphasis upon academics, and I served as I think that the first time I said rush, I think the first one I came on for I was the academic advisor for the sorority. So, we try to say you have at least a 3-point average if possible for the whole sorority.
Well, my impression is that the Coyotes have done well on that score and have maintained high academic standards.
And they have led the last few years that I've checked on it.
And the sororities more than the fraternities, with a few exceptions.
Yeah.
Claire, this brings us then to your long period of connection with SMU, namely when you came to work at the School of Business. In what year was that?
I didn't come until 1979.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I had also been involved in the Alumni Association, is on the board of the Alumni Association during the 60s. So things ran parallel, but I came, that ran through about 76. And when I went off the alumni board at the close of your tenure there, in other words, the number of the years that you can serve, had to go figure out a way to get back to SMU. And partly because I had a daughter that was here at the time and another one that was getting ready to start. And
so the staff benefits were
very prime, very prime, and the influence.
And so you came, how did you end up in the School of Business? Did you go to, who was the dean then?
Alan Coleman was the dean.
Did you go to Coleman or someone on that
No,
staff?
Dan Weston, who was the associate dean for external affairs, is the one who actually hired me, I should say.
Did you know Dan Weston from other connections?
No, I didn't. I just heard about the position. And matter of fact, it was Jeannie Johnson, who's currently our ambassador in France.
Yes, to OECD.
I had met her on a couple of occasions, and she said, I know just the right job for you. You go see Dan. I had applied out at the management school. I had a friend in the management school at that time, and she said, come out and see Jeannie. And so I talked to Jeannie, and she said she didn't have a job for me, but she knew just where one was.
She knows more people in town than anyone else, I've been led to believe.
Oh, right.
Now, so you came into Dan Weston's office, and what was his responsibility?
He was external affairs for the business school. And we... Had
that office been created by Alan Coleman?
I think so. I don't know if Grayson had it before, but I know Alan had created that. And Dan was very interested in cultivating the associate board and the briefings, and so that then became my responsibility, and to cultivate the alumni, the MBAs, I should say, alumni.
Tell us then about the associate board.
The associate board was a group of men and women. We had 100 that we tried to recruit and challenge. Most of these were presidents or vice presidents of their companies and organizations, and we matched them with the MBA students in a relationship that was very loose. In other words, it wasn't, they formally met each other at an event. The students then would go through the resumes of the associate board members and name 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 that they would like to have. And then it became my responsibility to match those up and give each associate board member anywhere from 1 to 3 students, generally.
How did we find the members of the associate board?
Recommendations, recruitment, all sorts of places.
Were most of them alumni of SMU?
No, some were. And we did sort of mine our MBA association for that sort of thing. But we also occasionally would go to a company and say, Texas Instruments, for example, you know, we really need a good person that's higher up in the organization on there. Who would you recommend? And they would name somebody sometimes.
Claire, how was this related to the cooperative work program in which students went into?
Not
Dallas
really at
firms?
all. Not really at all. It was not designed to give the students a job. It's designed to be a mentor, give them a sounding board. If they came to you and said, "What is economics? You know, what do you do in this company?" Or "I think I want to go into finance. What are the opportunities in Bank One?" or whatever it was at the time. And the associate board member very often would have them down for breakfast or a lunch or something and introduce them to certain people. Might let them spend a day down there, a half day, sort of shadowing them. But more than anything, it could be, I could call you up as an associate board member if I were an MBA student and say, "I'm not looking to your company for a job, but do you know of anybody in so-and-so?" And they'd say, "Well, you need to go see so-and-so and so-and-so." So it was the good network.
Beginning of a network.
Beginning of a network and teaching students how to use the network. And of course,
there were women as well as men, of course, on the
right.
associates.
And one of my jobs as director of special events was what I always kiddingly said was care and feeding of our associate board, you know, to do a couple of social events that stroke them and thank them on behalf of the university, and yet made them interested in the students, and we would have them out occasionally for little small seminars that I would stage for the students and things like that.
But now, I was aware of your work, Claire, first, I think, and foremost, with business briefings.
Okay.
Which was closely allied, I suppose, to the associates program, but reaching a much wider audience.
Much wider. When I came on, they had 3 or 4 of these, because Alan had started them. And his purpose, I think, was to present an outstanding speaker to the business community under the sponsorship of the business school. In other words, create a forum where Paul Volcker comes in and speaks. And it's under the sponsorship of the business school. And you as a person can buy a ticket and come and ask a question. And the whole thing was done in a fairly structured format. And we had some pretty high-powered people.
For many years, you used the Fairmont Hotel for those briefings.
We did. And
was there ever thought of trying to stage them on campus?
Yes, we did 1 or 2. I think I looked up and I had done 52 briefings while I was at SMU. Now, when George Bush Sr., that's not really senior,
41.
but George Bush I was vice president, we had wanted to get him, and you asked me earlier how we came about these. Well, you did it by influence, and in this case, Ed Cox knew him. And I got a call, I never shall forget this, I got a call on a Monday or Tuesday afternoon prior to Easter weekend saying, "We can have George Bush next Tuesday." You know, there's a holiday on Friday, there's a holiday on Easter,
Sunday.
Saturday, Sunday. Normally we had 4 to 6 weeks to put together a briefing, send out print brochures, send them out to companies, which we had a big mailing list that was very coveted, and companies would buy these and we could put it together in that period of time.
But crisis.
Crisis. So we got very inventive on that. We had it at McFarland, called the development office, and they used it as their invitation list and invited key development people to come free of charge. I mean, we we did it. We took a hit on that one. We didn't earn any money. We spent a lot.
An investment in.
It was an investment in the future, and it was a crisis time. And I remember there were Secret Service on top of McFarland, looking down and all around and what have you. But turned out to be one of these fantastic events. There wasn't a spare seat in the whole auditorium. And on Tuesday morning, we pulled off a briefing. So, yes, we did have one on campus.
Remarkable. There must have been police and Secret Service everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yes.
that was really a...
Well, they were major productions. I remember
Wow,
thousands of
wow.
people came, and they were all fed somehow.
Well, Milton Friedman always was one of our big attractions. We got him back here 3 different times.
I had been his student, and I took him to the airport the time he was here. I think you intervened on my behalf and gave me that assignment.
Well, we'd had him here twice, and I remember how shocked I was one time. I said, I want him again, and the dean said, go after it. So I picked up the phone, because I had the phone number from previous times, and called. And I never shall forget when the phone answered and it says, this is Milt. I went, up, and extended the invitation on behalf of SMU, and he said yes, he would come again. So we set some dates, and off we went again. But those were pretty big, because they were...
Everyone turned out.
I actually had to have an extra room down at the Fairmont, and we did video broadcasting and what have you to accommodate everybody.
He's such a great performer.
Yeah.
He knows exactly where he stands.
And one of the key things of those briefings that we always did, and I don't know that this is done anymore, but to me the value of it was we would generally request that the speaker come back to campus and meet with a group of students in the afternoon.
I was going to ask if students got involved.
That was how we involved the students.
Were they invited to the luncheons? In limited numbers, perhaps?
I used a lot of students as help down there. And of course, they came free and heard it.
Mm-hmm.
They were all my student helpers. I used primarily MBAs.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked up the questions from everybody and shuffled them and served as our ushers. And, you know, we always had 20 to 25 students involved. But when we came back to campus, those were some real teaching experiences.
Then it was a campus affair.
And we would have anywhere from 30 people in Fincher living room to 300 or 400 when Milton Friedman came back.
What was a typical kind of schedule for the briefings, Claire? Were there as many as, well, maybe 2 per semester or something of that sort?
My idea was to try to do four per semester. That didn't always work out because you couldn't get the people, or, you know, something of that nature.
1 per month, yes.
If we could. And the schedule was very highly timed. At 11:30, we would have the speaker there to meet the VIPs that may be sponsoring tables, or some of those at the head table, or invited guests. At 12 o'clock, we marched to the head table, and promptly, or we're really at 2 minutes to 5. I mean, it was timed, 2 minutes to 12. We marched to the head table, and the invocation would be given promptly at 12. We would move very quickly to service of the lunch, and by 12:30, we would be starting the program to introduce any folderol or head table or whatever, and the speaker would be on within 2 or 3 minutes of that. And
Claire,
we tried to be through by 1:30 so that any business person could make an appointment and get back to the office.
I was going to say that those were great years, I think, for the School of Business. I think the school matured in that period. There
was a lot of visibility.
There was a succession of deans, from Ellen Kuhlman, who was his successor.
Roy Herberger.
Roy Herberger.
And that Roy, I have to say, was the builder of the new building.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gene Byrne was the interim one at that point.
For 1 year? Maybe longer.
Seemed like it was a little bit longer than that. And then David
Blake.
followed him, and then I left. So, so.
Have you? Do you want to make any observations about the development of the school at that time?
Oh, I think it was moving and shaking. You know, I mean, it was growing. I mean, we developed from me taking care of the alumni to hired alumni officers to hiring a development officer to going out and raising the money to build the building. That all happened under, I think Alan Coleman had laid the foundations, but it was Roy who came in and got Jenny St. John to go out and raise money for him and build the buildings.
Roy left SMU and went to the Thunderbird School, as
right,
I remember,
where he's still
as its
there.
president, and he is still there. Has he been a builder there?
He has, and he took Jenny with him, and they built 3 or 4 buildings out there.
He took his shovel with him.
She left, I guess, about 87 or 88, somewhere along in there.
Then somewhere in David Blake's deanship, you left the business school, Claire.
Well,
Finally.
Reorganization of the university at that time.
Your children were then grown and through SMU.
Right, I kept intending to quit. The benefits I didn't need anymore, but I'd taken very good advantage of it. I mean, we had the 3rd daughter come to SMU, so we're very red and blue Mustang all the way, and even 2 son-in-laws. So we've often said, you know, there are a bunch of degrees in our family. I had taken advantage of it and took my MLA during that period of time, and that's when I had the privilege of having you as a professor.
We had fun in that course, didn't we?
You know, I suddenly realized what economics was at the graduate level.
Well, we were not hard on, I think, on that student body, but it was fun. We talked about policy issues.
We did.
And you were the top of the class.
Well, thank you very much. But it was fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that period.
When you left the business school, did you stayed on with the university?
Right. They sort of dissolved the individual school directors of special events and made one university director of special events. And so I not only still had the business school, but with not all the same responsibilities. I kept the briefings to help on those, but associate board went like to the graduate area. The BAP, which we had started during that time also, which was the business associate program for undergraduates, and that went to the undergraduate office, and as I said, we'd already parceled off the alumni to a full-time person there.
Did you have responsibility for the undergraduate, the BAB?
I created it, or helped create it, let's put it that way. A student came to us, and when I say I created, I helped do the implementation of it. A student came to Betsy Byer, the director of the undergraduate program, and to me and said, I want something like the MBAs have. And so we put a format together and it worked there. And again, we recruited about 100 students.
One had to find more associates.
Well, we went out and a few of our associate board, believe it or not, said, that's so much fun, I'll take on an undergraduate. But most of them were new recruits. and we could maybe go down to manager level on those particular people. But they served more as a mentor to the undergraduate students, and I think SMU benefited greatly from that. I know they did publicity-wise at the time, and several national magazines, both our associate board program and our BAP program were mentioned.
I think we got our hands out into the community at that point too, and built a connection between the university and Dallas. Then, but you took on a similar task for the whole university.
Yes, and that was an exciting time. I did Ken Pye's, worked with Mary Jane in his office to put on the trustee events, and make sure that they were well done,
And they were beautifully done. I
took
remember.
on some things over at Dedman and did a couple of conferences. And I remember a physics conference that just blew my mind away. That because I would sit and listen to these things, and I thought, gee, I didn't know all of that. But I tried to make the conference itself very smooth in the logistics of it and how it worked, and good readable name tags that were easy, and formats and what have you, and
No detail was overlooked.
and we had developed down at the Fairmont Hotel years before the seating of tables that was so simple and so easy that I don't know why anybody else hadn't thought of it. And this was to
What's the secret?
number our tables in such a way that the first row was ones, two, then the second twos, threes, fours, fives, and then you come over the same way, 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So that if you tell me you're at table 45, I know you're on the 5th row back, 5 over, and you can find your table very quickly.
One of the many secrets of the trade. Now, so you stayed, you were working
We'd
in
also
the,
done something I didn't think about until just now. One of the things that the Cox School of Business did at the time, that's a predecessor of the Distinguished Alumni Award, was we used to have Entrepreneur of the Year. And we were able to honor a number of very outstanding entrepreneurs from Dallas during that period of time.
Has that program ended?
It ended. It ended before I
remember
ever left the school. It just sort of seemed to reach its maximum, but we had honored, Caruth. We'd honored Sam Wiley way back in the beginning of the computer. Mary Kay Ash, Mary Crowley, Bob Dedman, several of those people along the way were honored as Entrepreneurs of the Year.
Well, many of them became great friends of the university.
They did.
In
They
due
did.
course, also. So at this point, you were a part of the Office of Development or the Office of Public Relations, or
Office of Public Relations. I reported to
or Public Affairs. Was
Public
it?
Affairs. I reported to Jeannie Whitman, who was the director of that department at that time. And of course, she reported to Bill Lively, who was the vice president for development.
And
now
she now has that,
she now has that role.
that assignment and does it beautifully, I think.
And that was a privilege to know her for that year, because she was a wonderful person and to work for her.
And she's a great asset to SMU. And Claire, then how long did you stay in that office?
A year.
And then you finally took the retirement you'd been thinking about?
I'd been thinking about it a long time, and SMU was still in the throes of reorganization, and quite frankly, they offered me an awfully good package. I may be the only umbrella that ever came out of SMU.
Golden parachute.
Or something. And so I said, well, I don't think I can pass it up. So, and Dale had retired the year before on a similar thing with TI, so I said, well, might as well stay home
How nice.
and do other things.
Looking back over that long period, Claire, what's happened to SMU? That's from the 40s to almost 1990, when I don't know what your year of retirement was, but must have
91,
been
I think.
about then.
91, 92.
That's 40 odd years of university development. Has the university changed? Has its mission changed? Has its relationship to the community changed?
Oh, yes, certainly. And basically for the better. You know, I can remember being up on the 3rd floor of Dallas Hall in the speech office and looking out, and, you know, I was here when there were still the trailers down in Mustang Village, because when I was here, all the veterans were here. And they were living on campus, and we got our first student union while I was on campus, which was a discarded Army USO house, building.
A temporary building.
Temporary building.
Where was it located?
Over there where the Cox School of Business is.
Is it?
And I remember I was social chairman for the student council, and I held the first homecoming dance in that building, and we were so happy it wasn't the gym. And of course, so then I watched Humphrey Lee being built, and then of course Hughes Trigg, and all of it's for the better. I've watched the university grow. I saw it go through governance studies in the 1968. I think I served on it as an alumni representative of a governance study, and then I watched one in the 70s and was aware of one when I was employed as a staff person in the 80s. So, I've watched us constantly hone our goals and our skills and move ahead.
Claire,
and I'm proud of my university.
It's been fun to have a conversation with you this afternoon. Thank you for coming. I think this will be an important part of SMU's archives.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.